Welcome, everyone, to Easy History Podcast and to a deep dive that I think you're going to like it. It's about a period that really set the stage for a whole new nation, the American Revolution.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah, so we're going to unpack how 13 colonies, just clinking to the edge of this vast continent, decided to take on the mightiest empire in the world.
Yeah, the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. So why should you care? Why are we doing this deep dive? Well, the ripple effects of their fight, for liberty and self-governance, these things are still felt today, not just in America, but across the globe.
Oh, yeah, all over the world.
So
what's fascinating is this wasn't just like a bam explosion of rebellion.
Right.
The seeds of discontent were sown long before the first shot was fired. And to understand the revolution, we have to understand the colonies themselves,
Right.
this patchwork of different identities and economy and even religions.
Okay, so paint us a picture. It's the late 1700s. What's life like in these 13 colonies? Like, what's going on?
Okay, so imagine you're taking a journey down the Atlantic coast, right?
Maybe.
In the north, you got these bustling ports like Boston,
Yeah.
alive with shipbuilding and trade and commerce.
Yeah.
It's a region of smaller farms, timber production, a certain independent spirit,
Right. Okay.
As you move south to the central colonies, it's a mix of agriculture and trade, but you also start to see these larger states.
Okay.
And unfortunately, a sharper divide between the rich and the poor.
Right.
And then that's the south.
Yeah.
Vast plantations dominate the landscape, sadly reliant on enslaved labor to cultivate those cash crops like tobacco, rice, and eventually cotton.
So also when we have this recipe for tension, these are very different societies with different values and priorities, all trying to coexist under British rule.
Exactly. And it's important to note that religion adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Okay.
The North leans toward Puritanism and those dissenting Protestant sects, while the South is aligned more closely with the Anglican Church.
Right.
And these religious and cultural distinctions would play a role in the political landscape as well.
Yeah, okay, so we've got this tapestry of differences. But life in the colonies is good,
Yeah.
at least for a while. What changed?
Well, remember the 7 Years' War?
Yeah.
This costly conflict with France that saw colonists, fighting bravely for the British crown.
Right.
They came out of that war expecting more autonomy.
Okay.
More of a say in their own affairs, similar to their counterparts back in England.
Well, that makes sense. They put their lives on the line.
Yeah,
They expect some recognition for that.
absolutely. But instead of granting more freedom, Britain did the opposite.
Oh.
They tightened their grip. They imposed all these new taxes, the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act.
Wow.
Their reasoning was to replenish their war-depleted coffers.
Okay, yeah.
But to the colonists, this was a slap in the face.
And this is where we get that famous cry, no taxation without representation.
Precisely. The colonists saw these acts as a direct violation of British law,
Yeah.
a fundamental principle that they were ironically better versed in than many in England itself.
Okay.
Robust education in the colonists, fueled by universities like Harvard and Yale, created a populace very aware of their rights as Englishmen,
Okay.
which is crazy.
That is fascinating. And then, of course, there's that iconic act of defiance, the Boston Tea Party in 1773. That's like straight out of a movie.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a moment that really captures the audacity and that frustration that was growing,
Yeah.
of the colonists. Throwing all that tea into Boston Harbor, it was a dramatic escalation, a symbolic middle finger to British authority.
Yeah.
It showed that they were willing to take action, to risk everything for what they believed in.
So we have these economic grievances, this sense of betrayed rights, and now outright acts of rebellion.
Yeah.
How do we go from disgruntled colonists to a
Well,
full-blown revolution?
this is where things get really interesting. A new generation of American intellectuals emerges.
Okay.
Inspired by these radical ideas sweeping across Europe, the Enlightenment.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Thinkers like John Locke with his theories on natural rights, life, liberty, and property. He was hugely influential.
Yeah.
Then there's Montesquieu, whose ideas on the separation of powers resonated deeply with those who were wary of centralized authority.
Right.
Even the Italian Cesare Beccaria, with his critiques of cruel and unusual punishment, he found an audience in the colonies.
Wow.
So these ideas that were once confined to academic circles, they're now being debated in taverns and town squares,
Right.
fueling the flames of revolution.
It's amazing how those ideas traveled across the ocean and found fertile ground in the colonies. But ideas alone don't start revolutions.
Right.
Were there specific individuals who helped turn that thought into action?
Absolutely. One such figure is Thomas Paine. His pamphlet Common Sense
Oh, yeah.
was like a lightning bolt in 1776.
Okay.
Paine was a master communicator. He took these complex Enlightenment ideals and distilled them into plain language,
Okay.
accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
He argued that monarchy was inherently tyrannical and that it was common sense for America to break free, to form its own independent republic.
So Paine provides that intellectual fuel, the argument for why independence is necessary. But who steps up to lead the fight, to actually turn the words into action on the battlefield?
Well, a certain Virginia planter and veteran of the 7 Years' War enters the picture,
Okay.
George Washington.
Okay.
He may not have been the most brilliant military tactician in the traditional sense,
Right.
but he possessed something far more valuable.
What's that?
Leadership. He had this remarkable ability to inspire, to hold that ragtag continental army together,
Right.
despite incredible hardships, you know?
Nice.
Shortages of supplies, low morale, and the constant threat of desertion.
Yeah, it's rough. So the stage is set. We've got the ideas. We've got the leaders. We've got this growing anger. Feels like we're on the verge of a war.
And indeed we are. In 1775, the simmering tension finally boils over with the first shots fired at Lexington and Concord.
Oh, wow.
It was this clash of vastly unequal forces.
Right.
The poorly equipped colonists against the mighty British Army, the most powerful military force in the world at that time.
I mean, it's mind-blowing to think about those first clashes, right? Like farmers and shopkeepers taking on the redcoats.
Yeah.
Talk about a David and Goliath situation.
Yeah.
What chance did they really have against the mighty British Empire?
Well, their chances might have seemed slim first.
Right.
But they had a few secret weapons. Grit, determination, and a deep understanding of the terrain. Plus, they were fighting for something far more powerful than military might.
Right.
They were fighting for their homes, their families, their ideals.
And they had Washington. Didn't he play a key role in those early days of the war?
Absolutely. Washington was a master strategist,
Okay.
recognizing that he couldn't win a conventional war against the British.
Right.
So he focused on a war of attrition, hit-and-run tactics, using the terrain to their advantage, keeping his army intact.
Right.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
A brilliant strategy that would ultimately wear down the British,
Okay.
turn the tide of the war.
One of those turning points was the Battle of Saratoga in 1777.
Right.
Huge.
That was a big win for the colonists.
Huge win. Saratoga proved to the world that the American forces were a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
It also had a major impact on the international stage.
Okay. How so?
It convinced France to formally ally with the colonists,
Oh, wow.
a move that would prove crucial in securing eventual victory.
So France sees an opportunity to weaken their old rival, Great Britain,
Yeah.
and they jump in on the side of the Americans. Didn't Spain also join the fight a little later on? They did, yes. Spain saw a chance to regain some lost territory and joined the fray against the British. And this foreign aid was a lifeline for the Americans,
Okay.
providing much-needed supplies, troops, and a distraction for British forces on other fronts.
Right. So even while this war is raging, the colonists take this bold step. They declare independence. That's July 4th, 1776, a date etched in the memory of every American.
It is the Declaration of Independence. It's one of those documents that it sends shivers down your spine. Primarily authored by Thomas Jefferson. It's a masterful blend of legal arguments, political philosophy, and a passionate call for self-determination.
Right.
A document that still resonates today with phrases like, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, you know.
These words have become cornerstones of democratic thought.
They have.
But it's also important to acknowledge the tragic contradiction at the heart of the Declaration, right? The fact that it was written by men who owned slaves in a nation built on the backs of enslaved people.
You're right. The Declaration, while a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of ideas, is also a stark reminder of the hypocrisy that existed at the nation's founding.
Yeah.
The legacy of slavery is a dark stain on American history, one that would take another bloody conflict, the Civil War, to finally address.
Right. It's a reminder that freedom and equality aren't given they're fought for, and that the struggle for a more just society is ongoing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But for now, let's get back to the Revolution. The war continued for several years, and despite setbacks, the Americans, with the help of their European allies, started to gain the upper hand. The tide turned decisively in their favor at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781.
Yorktown was the final blow, right? The one that forced the British to surrender?
It was. Combined French and American forces trapped a large British contingent at Yorktown, leading to their surrender. It was a strategic masterpiece.
Wow.
And it effectively sealed the fate of the British in America.
And then finally in 1783, the Treaty of Paris is signed, formally recognizing American independence and bringing an end to the war. So this ragtag group of colonies has managed to defeat a global superpower. A truly remarkable achievement. But now what? They've won their independence, but what comes next? How do you build a nation from scratch?
Well, that's the challenge they face next.
Yeah.
Creating a government for this brand new nation, they had to find a way to unite these 13 distinct colonies,
Right.
each with their own history and interests,
Yeah.
even rivalries under a single flag.
Right.
It was a monumental task.
It really was.
One that would require compromise, ingenuity, and a shared belief in the promise of a new kind of government.
I imagine those first few years after the war were pretty chaotic. What were some of the biggest hurdles they had to overcome in forging this new nation?
Well, one of the most pressing issues was how to balance the power of the states with the need for a strong central government.
Right.
They'd just fought a war to escape the perceived tyranny of a distant king.
Mm-hmm.
So there was understandable hesitation about creating another powerful central authority.
Right. It's that classic tension between federal power and states' rights. It's a debate that continues to this day.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Their first attempt at a unified government, the Articles of Confederation adopted in 1777, reflected this fear of centralized power.
Okay.
It created a weak central government with limited authority, intentionally designed to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past.
Sounds like they went a little too far in the other direction, though. Didn't the Articles end up being too weak to effectively govern the new nation?
They did. It's like they swung the pendulum from one extreme to the other.
Yeah.
The Articles proved ineffective in dealing with a number of critical issues, including interstate disputes, economic instability, and threats from foreign powers. Think of it like this. Imagine trying to run a country where each state is essentially acting like its own independent nation.
Right.
With its own currency, its own trade policies, and its own army.
Wow.
It just wasn't sustainable.
No. So give us some concrete examples. What were some of the things that went wrong under the Articles of Confederation?
Well, for one thing, the central government couldn't effectively regulate commerce between the states, which hampered economic growth and led to trade wars. It also lacked the power to tax, making it difficult to raise funds for essential services like a national army.
Oh, wow.
There was no national currency, which created chaos in financial markets, and the central government had very little authority to resolve disputes between states.
Oh, no.
Which often led to simmering tensions
Right.
and even threats of violence.
So they had this new nation full of promise and potential,
Yeah.
but they were struggling to govern themselves effectively. What was the solution? Did they just go back to the drawing board?
They did. In 1787, delegates from the states gathered in Philadelphia for what became known as the Constitutional Convention.
Okay.
Their mission to address the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and create a more stable and effective government for the United States.
This is where the real magic happens.
It is.
The creation of the U.S. Constitution. One of the most enduring and influential documents in history. How did they manage to pull that off?
It wasn't easy.
I bet.
The convention was a cauldron of competing interests
Right.
and ideologies.
Yeah.
You had representatives from large states and small states, slave states and free states, all vying for power and influence. They argued fiercely over issues like representation slavery and the balance of power between the branches of government.
It must have been quite a scene. These larger-than-life figures locked in debate, hammering out the future of a nation.
It was. You had towering figures like James Madison, often considered the father of the Constitution, meticulously taking notes, advocating for a strong central government with checks and balances to prevent tyranny. Then there was Alexander Hamilton,
Yeah.
a staunch advocate for a powerful federal government and a national bank, arguing passionately for a system that would promote economic growth and stability. And of course, you had the elder statesman Benjamin Franklin, whose wisdom and diplomatic skills helped to smooth over some of the heated disagreements.
Sounds like a clash of the titans.
Yeah.
How did they ever manage to reach an agreement?
It was a testament to their commitment to the experiment of American democracy.
Yeah.
Despite their differences, they all shared this belief in the need for a more perfect union.
Mm-hmm.
And through a series of compromises, debates, and near collapses,
Oh, wow.
they managed to create something truly remarkable, a framework for government that has stood the test of time.
So let's talk about the Constitution itself. What were some of the key features that made it such an enduring document?
Well, one of the most important innovations was the establishment of a federal system,
Okay.
dividing powers between the national government and the states.
Okay.
It was a brilliant solution allowing for both national unity and state autonomy.
So you have the federal government responsible for things like regulating commerce, declaring war, and coining money, while the states retain control over matters like education and local law enforcement.
Yeah.
It's a balance that has been debated and challenged throughout American history, but it's a testament to the foresight of the Founding Fathers that it has endured for so long.
Exactly. Another key feature was the separation of powers,
Okay.
dividing the government into three branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial, each with its own distinct powers and responsibilities.
The legislative branch, Congress, makes the laws. The executive branch, the president, enforces the laws. And the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, interprets the laws. It's all about preventing any one branch from becoming too powerful, right?
Right. They also put in place a system of check and balances,
Okay.
where each branch can limit the power of the others. For example, the president can veto laws passed by Congress, but Congress can override the veto with a two-thirds majority.
Oh, wow.
A system designed to prevent tyranny
Right.
and protect individual liberties.
It's incredible to think that this framework, created over 2 centuries ago, is still the basis for American government today.
I know, it's amazing.
But we can't ignore the fact that the Constitution also had some major flaws,
Yeah.
the most glaring of which was its accommodation of slavery.
You're right. The issue of slavery was a major point of contention at the convention. The southern states, whose economies were heavily dependent on enslaved labor, fought hard to protect their interests.
Right.
And tragically, they succeeded in getting a number of provisions included in the Constitution that protected slavery, like the 3/5 clause,
Okay.
which counted enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of representation in Congress.
It's a dark chapter in American history.
It is.
A reminder that even the most revered documents can be flawed,
Right.
and that the struggle for equality and justice is ongoing.
Absolutely. But the Constitution is also a living document,
Okay?
one that has been amended and reinterpreted over time to reflect changing values
Right.
and address injustices. For example, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote.
Right.
It's a testament to the flexibility and resilience of the Constitution that it's been able to adapt to the changing needs of the nation.
So they had the Constitution, the framework for their new government. But the story doesn't end there.
No.
What were some of the challenges faced by the fledgling nation of those early years?
Well, for starters, the nation was saddled with war debts, and there was no national currency. It was a recipe for economic chaos.
Right.
Chaos.
Sounds like they needed someone with a knack for finance
Yes.
to get things in order. Enter Alexander Hamilton.
You got it. Hamilton, as the first Secretary of the Treasury, was a financial genius. He put in place a series of policies that stabilized the economy,
Okay.
including establishing a national bank and assuming state debts.
But didn't Hamilton's policies also spark a lot of controversy?
They did. His vision of a strong centralized government clashed with Thomas Jefferson's belief in a more limited federal role and greater states' rights.
Right.
These competing visions led to the formation of the first political parties. The Federalists,
Okay.
led by Hamilton, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Jefferson.
It's fascinating how these early ideological battles shaped the course of American politics and continue to resonate in contemporary political discourse.
They do.
Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. It's like the original political rivalry.
Exactly. And it laid the groundwork for the two-party system that has dominated American politics ever since. So we've seen the birth of a nation, the creation of a remarkable constitution, and the emergence of the first political parties.
Wow.
It's an incredible story of innovation, compromise, and sadly enduring flaws.
But this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
The story of the American experiment was far from over.
Right.
The nation still had to grapple with westward expansion, the rise of sexualism, and ultimately the tragedy of the Civil War,
It's true.
all of which we'll explore in our next segment.
Yes.
It's a journey that takes us through moments of triumph and tragedy, reflecting the complexities of a nation wrestling with its ideals and its legacy. Stay tuned for the final chapter of our deep dive into the American Revolution and its enduring legacy. So we left off with a brand new nation, a shiny new constitution, the beginnings of a political system. But as we all know, building a nation, it's messy business.
Yeah, it is.
What happened next? What were some of those growing pains that the U.S. experienced in those early years?
Well, imagine this vast, untamed frontier beckoning to the east, westward expansion,
Right.
full of promised land opportunity, a chance to start fresh. But it also brought with it this moral dilemma that would haunt the nation, the question of slavery.
This is where those fault lines we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
those differences between North and South really start to widen, right?
Exactly. As new territories were acquired, the debate raged over whether slavery would be allowed in those areas.
Right.
The North, with its growing industrial economy and a rising tide of abolitionist sentiment, increasingly viewed slavery as a moral abomination.
Right.
But the South, whose economy was deeply reliant on enslaved labor for its agricultural prosperity, saw any attempt to restrict slavery as a direct threat to their way of life.
So westward expansion, instead of uniting the nation, is actually pushing it further apart. It's like this ticking time bomb underneath the foundation of the country.
That's a powerful way to put it. And as more territories were added to the Union, the balance of power between slave states and free states became increasingly precarious.
Right.
Every new state admitted to the Union had the potential to tip the scales in favor of one side or the other, raising the stakes in the political arena.
And this is where we see the rise of sectionalism, right? That idea that loyalty to one's region, North or South, starts to outweigh loyalty to the nation as a whole.
Precisely. Political parties increasingly aligned along sectional lines, making compromise even more difficult. It's like they were speaking different languages, each side viewing the other with suspicion and distrust.
Were there any attempts to bridge this divide, to find some kind of middle ground?
There were a number of compromises attempted, but the underlying issue of slavery was just too divisive. Take the Missouri Compromise of 1820, for example.
Okay.
It was an attempt to maintain the balance by admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while also prohibiting slavery north of the 36 degrees 30 parallel.
So they literally drew a line on a map and hoped that would solve the problem.
It was a temporary fix, a way to kick the can down the road and avoid confronting the deeper issue, but the fundamental conflict remained unresolved. It was like trying to patch up a cracked foundation. Eventually, the whole structure was going to crumble.
And crumble it did. That simmering conflict finally erupted into the Civil War, one of the darkest chapters in American history.
It is a dark chapter.
It's hard to fathom over 600,000 Americans lost their lives in a war fought primarily over the issue of slavery and the question of whether a state had the right to secede from the Union.
It's a tragic testament to the enduring legacy of slavery and the deep divisions it created within the nation. Brother fighting against brother families tore apart a nation at war with itself.
It's a sobering reminder that the ideals of liberty and equality so eloquently expressed in the Declaration of Independence weren't fully realized for all Americans until after a long and bloody struggle.
And even then, the fight for true equality and justice continued, as we saw in the civil rights movement of the 20th century, and the ongoing efforts to address racial and social injustices today. The echoes of that struggle for equality for a more perfect union can be traced back to those early days of the Republic.
Yeah.
And the compromises, both noble and flawed, that shaped its foundation.
So what began as a revolution for independence from a distant king transformed into a struggle for national unity and ultimately a fight for the very soul of a nation. It's a reminder that the work of democracy is never truly finished.
Yeah.
That the fight for freedom and equality requires constant vigilance and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about our past.
Well said. The American Revolution and its aftermath offer a profound lesson about the enduring power of ideas, the complexities of nation building, and the ongoing pursuit of a more perfect union. It's a story that continues to resonate today, reminding us that the choices we make, the compromises we forge, and the ideals we champion can have a lasting impact on generations to come.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the American Revolution. We've journeyed from those bustling ports of Boston to the battlefields of Saratoga and Yorktown, from the halls of the Constitutional Convention to the tragic battlefields of the Civil War. It's been a whirlwind tour through a pivotal period in American history.
It has.
And we hope you've gained a deeper understanding of the events that shaped the nation we know today.
And as you continue to explore history, remember that the past is not just a collection of dates and events, but a living tapestry that connects us all.
Yeah.
It offers valuable insights into the human condition, the challenges we face, and the enduring quest for freedom, justice, and a more perfect union.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.